It's time for Recipe of the Day. There is a hurricane heading straight for me here in Central Florida. And so I'm doing a lot of cooking and prep, but also anticipating that Marty and the kids are all going to be home for the next few days. Schools, universities are all closed. And so I want to do a few little things to just perk things up and put smiles on everybody's faces. Whether you have a hurricane heading your way or you're just looking for a way to spice up the middle of the week, I have something for you. It is a pumpkin spice hot chocolate. Yes, it is. Now, this has real pumpkin in it. You can use canned pumpkin puree or your homemade pumpkin puree. It's, of course, got that pumpkin pie spice in there. And then you can make it either with cocoa or with chocolate chips. I actually prefer it with cocoa. It gets kind of richer. I found that anything that added too much extra sweetness to this started to take away from the pumpkin and the spice flavors. So the little bit of cocoa was better than the chocolate chips to me, but you can, of course, do either one. And then you can make this in the microwave or you can do it on the stovetop. I will say most of the time these days, if I'm making hot chocolate, I'm just doing like 1 or 2 mugs, and then it's way easier to just do it in the microwave. But if I'm making a larger batch, then because you're doing it in the microwave, you have to take it out and stir it quite often. The larger batch takes a longer time to heat. It becomes more of a pain, and it's easier to just mix everything in a pot on the stove and do it that way. The other thing you can do is do it in the slow cooker. If you're doing a really big batch, like for a party or something, you can actually make it in the slow cooker and heat it. I have a delicious slow cooker hot chocolate recipe that I will link to in the show notes for you if you want to see how to do that. Alternatively, you can make it on the stove or in the microwave and then use your slow cooker to keep it warm. That's always an option also. So if you're doing that kind of big batch with it all in the slow cooker staying warm, then if you're doing this for a party, it's wonderful to have like a whole bunch of different toppings set out and like a hot chocolate bar. I will link to a set of topping ideas that I think is just really wonderful. And if you really want to take this to a complete next level, which I'm not doing right now because there's a hurricane coming, but if there's no hurricane coming to you, making homemade marshmallows is just sublime. If you've never had a homemade marshmallow before, you are missing out. They are not like the store-bought ones at all. In fact, if you're somebody who doesn't like marshmallows and wonder why they're so popular, I really think that they became popular based on how good the homemade ones were. And then it got kind of commercialized and it just became a thing. But you taste those homemade ones and you're like, oh, I totally get why this became such a favorite treat for people if they used to always taste like this. And then if you make your own, you'll see that as part of the process, you're dusting them with confectioner's sugar, which I call icing sugar because I'm Canadian, and you can mix cinnamon with that confectioner's sugar, and you're essentially dusting all the marshmallows with cinnamon sugar. It is amazing. So I will link to the homemade marshmallow recipe as well. So those are just all ideas. But of course, you could just do 1 mug in the microwave. Super simple. No big crock pot full of hot chocolate. No big bar of toppings. No homemade marshmallows necessary. You can just do this in a mug. So I'm going to tell you first how to make this with the cocoa powder, and then I will tell you how to do it with the chocolate chips. And as I go, I will give instructions for microwave and stovetop. So what you're going to do if you're just making the 1 serving, of course, you could scale this up as much as you want, but for 1 serving, you get yourself a microwave safe mug or use a microwave safe measuring cup. And into that, you're measuring a tablespoon of maple syrup, getting that fall flavor right from the beginning, right? 1 tablespoon of cocoa powder. I know that doesn't sound like very much, but it really is the right amount to give you some chocolate and not overpower what's coming next, which is the 2 tablespoons of pumpkin puree. Like I said, canned or homemade. And then you're doing a 1/4 teaspoon of pumpkin pie spice. If you don't have pumpkin pie spice or don't like pumpkin pie spice, you can use a 1/4 teaspoon of cinnamon, and then optionally a pinch of any of the following: ground ginger, cloves, allspice, nutmeg, or cardamom. Oh, cardamom just tastes like Christmas to me, you know? You're also adding a 1/4 teaspoon of vanilla and a pinch of salt. Now give that a little stir. And then while you continue to stir, you slowly drizzle in a cup of milk. And then that goes into the microwave on high for 1 minute. Give it a stir and then heat it 30 seconds at a time, stirring after each interval until it reaches the temperature that you like. Top it with whipped cream. That's it. If you're doing it on the stove, mix all those first things I told you about, everything but the milk, in a little saucepan, and then you drizzle in the milk while stirring, and then you heat it on the stove over medium heat, stirring often until it's as hot as you'd like it. Now, if you are using chocolate chips, I will say that if you go to the actual recipe on thecookful.com for this and look at the video, you will see that I did it differently than I wrote it up in the recipe, and that's just because I wasn't thinking when I made the video. But the best way to do it is to mix everything except for the chocolate chips first, and then once it's hot, you stir the chocolate chips in to melt them. It makes a much smoother texture. If you put the chocolate chips in the beginning and they're like heating in the microwave, they can break up and have that, that situation when you overheat chocolate chips. So ignore what's in that video and do it this way. So again, microwave safe mug. You're mixing together 2 tablespoons of pumpkin puree, 1 tablespoon of maple syrup. Oh, I should have said before for the other one as well. You do 1 tablespoon of maple syrup at first and then heat it all up. And then you can add up to 2 tablespoons more after. Like I was saying, I found that adding extra sweetness could take away from the pumpkin flavor a little bit. And I don't like things that are super sweet really anyways. I guess the other issue is that different maple syrups, different grades, different brands have different kind of like amounts of sweetness to them. So starting with less and then adding more is the best way to do it. Whether you are doing this with the chocolate chips or the cocoa in the microwave or on the stove. Okay, so it was 2 tablespoons of canned pumpkin puree, 1 tablespoon of maple syrup, a 1/4 teaspoon of the pumpkin pie spice, or like I said, cinnamon with a pinch of the other things if you'd like, a 1/4 teaspoon of vanilla and a pinch of salt. And you mix that up and then add in a cup of milk. And then you're heating that in the microwave for 1 minute at first. Give it a stir and then heat for 30 seconds at a time, stirring after each interval until it's nice and hot. Then you stir in 1 rounded tablespoon of semi-sweet chocolate chips and just stir until those melt in. Give it a taste. Add that extra maple syrup if you'd like. Top it with whipped cream and drink. And like I said, if you're going to do this on the stove, same as with the other recipe, you're mixing everything together except for those chocolate chips, and you're heating it over medium heat while stirring frequently until it's nice and hot. Take it off the heat and then stir in your chocolate chips, and that will be delicious. I cannot wait for you to try this. If you are in the path of Hurricane Milton like me, stay safe. If not, send your positive thoughts our way. I appreciate it. I will put the link to this recipe in the show notes for this podcast episode, or you can head to cookthestory.com/ROTD and get it there. Everything there is arranged by date, so it's helpful to know that today is Wednesday, October 9th of 2024. I'm Christine Pittman from cookthestory.com, thecookful.com, the all-new chicken cookbook, and from this podcast, Recipe of the Day. I hope you have a great day. Let's get cooking.